time to go back to the future. I looked at the RAAL SR1a a while back. This is their latest and greatest offering, another ribbon driver headphone, but this one they're calling a circumaural ribbon headphone driver. And I think the idea here is that once you put it inside of an enclosed ear cup, that the properties change pretty dramatically. And I think that's true. This headphone at a distance looks much more looks much more conventional than the SR1a, or I think it's now the SR1b. Anyway, but once you get up close, it's RAAL all the way. It's just wacky materials, interesting manufacturing techniques, progressive technology. I mean, these guys are real engineering lab rats for sure, and they're pushing audio engineering boundaries at every turn, and even construction and build boundaries. I was geeking out on the last pair of headphones I got to try from these guys, and at first I was like, oh, these kind of look normal, but the more you spend time with them, the more you realize all the stuff they've done that's really unique. Like, I love this crazy bent steel headband. They get so much out of one part, and then I'm guessing they sandblasted it or bead blasted or something to give it this nice finish, but I think that's stainless. And then these cups are they're like a high density polycarbonate, glass filled polycarbonate, and they've left this nice texturing. It almost appeared like 3D printing at first, but once you see it up close, you recognize that it's actually you can see some of the gate marks from the injection molding tool. They went with a 3.5 connection, which is awesome, although their cable is of course unique because they don't want you to accidentally plug this into the wrong kind of driver. It does require a specific driver. Really cool, nice, probably like a laser etched little metal protectors over the ribbon driver. So I don't know if it's the same driver out of their other headphone. I would guess, just from a sanity standpoint, that that's what they do. And then these pads are super wacky. They're memory foam, but with no sort of, leather or pleather or any kind of cover. So it's a really raw industrial look, kind of like their last headphone. Leather strap that just adjusts by moving it up and down in these 3 positions, and then the rest is just sort of taken up by the material and the behavior of the steel. They're not uncomfortable. They're not heavy. They're just a bit wacky to look at. They feel, when you get them out of the box, my first impression was like, they don't feel done. They don't feel fully baked yet. But that's sort of the RAAL thing. I mean, they're not, there's no wood boxes here. There's no velour slip sack. They're not going for a crazy unboxing. The boxes were nice, but, very direct and minimalist. They're going for this very interesting ribbon-driven sound profile. These are $2,000 naked, as they would say, which means comes with no transformer box. So if you don't have something that can drive ribbon cables, like say a Jotunheim R or one of RAAL's own products, that while there are certain, certainly, especially in the speaker world, amps that can drive 2-ohm loads, you're in uncharted territory and gambling with some pretty pricey headphones. You can also get it for $2,500 with this T11B. I love the names, so catchy. T11B transformer box. And this is kind of interesting. They've got it set up with 2 input taps. You can have 32 ohm or 16 ohm, and then this is the ribbon out. And for you savvy viewers, you'll quickly notice that this 4-pin XLR is the reverse of what you'd normally expect to plug a headphone cable in, and that is obviously by great intention. That's the same as on the Jotunheim R. The Jotunheim R is $500 as well, so that's an interesting premise as to whether you should go with this or go with that. I don't have them here to A/B, so I can't really provide any guidance, but there were some times at which I felt like the transformer box might have been holding these guys back. But this also gives you the ability to try all different kinds of amps with it, which is a tinkerer's paradise. So how do they sound? Well, much like my brief experience with their predecessor, these things are like clarity monsters. They they bring out a lot of detail, and that detail is fast and energetic and very controlled. They're snappy, they're quick, they've got just like great acceleration off the line. I was listening to Mario Rom's Inner Zone, Eternal Friction, which there's just like drums and horn, and that's all a very sparse track, and so compelling, so just like, yeah, just snappy and just pulled you in. Everything had so much energy and enough weight behind it to be, kind of believable. The mids, I struggled so much with the mids because sometimes I would feel like they had a lot of detail to present and a lot of interest, and then sometimes I'd feel like they were just a little like veiled, just a little like behind a layer of Vaseline or something. But what I began to realize when I'd start comparing these to like other very high-end planars is not that the mids are poor performers. It's just that the the detail in the highs and the like upper, sort of air gap treble regions are so good that by comparison it's sort of like, that doesn't sound quite right. But what it doesn't sound quite right is it just doesn't sound as good as some of the other areas where this headphone is outstanding at its price. Not that it's cheap, but let's be real with what kind of things we're comparing this to. It does have some of that like E-stat timbre to it. Can feel a little like tense, like a little under like tension, or like a little thinner sometimes, a little drier. So if that's something that's not to your liking, just a heads up. But if you're in the mood for that, if you're in the mood for something that's got that yeah, there's some of those, some of the things that E-stats do because they are so light and can move so fast, are present in the ribbon, if not even sort of emphasized to a certain degree. Soundstage is like a little forward, a little ahead of you, but it's not huge. Twinkly bits like do go and dance out around your head, which can be very magical. And the imaging is very good. It's super easy to find separation and sort of dial in on any like component in a piece that you want to listen to. Positioning, like, let's talk about the pads and positioning, because with the SR1a, like, you could tilt, you could sort of change how the ear speakers faced you, and so you'd get these very different presentations depending on if you sort of clamped them down on your ear or left them very wide open. And so there's definitely some of that still at play with these. So if I push the headphones really forward, so would have this part of the pad sort of touching the back of my ear, you'd get a little bit of softening, a little bit of rounding, a little bit more of kind of like it's just a nice planar kind of sound. And then if you push the headphones back on your ear, so this part of the pad was kind of touching the front of your ear, so you're getting these, the drivers now quite close to your ears, things would get brighter and snappy and much more energetic. Somewhere kind of in between was my favorite, but kind of song by song, and it was kind of nice that you could kind of push them around and get such a different presentation. These are the other pads, so you'll notice, I forget what they call them, like one's the donut and one's, anyway, they've got cute names for them, but these are the other pads. You'll see they're very similar in that these ones are missing two little chunks, right? So there's just basically these two little cutouts here. When I got these out of the box, they had these pads on, and I put them on, and my first impression was not really positive. Things felt kind of crowded. Mid bass felt overly emphasized. The lower bass was very nice and very deep, and much deeper than I remembered anything from the previous RAALs I tried. Very full, but just the technical prowess didn't seem to be there. I was not getting the detail, the imaging, the sparkle. And so I switched over, and then was like, yeah, this is more of like the RAAL sound I was expecting. Just this little bit of porting, this little bit of venting cleans things up so much. The headphones do get leaner. Certainly, they're sharper. They can be a little shoutier, a little more sibilant at times. But overall, I did swap back and forth a few more times, but like this was the jam for me. The little mechanism to swap them is kind of interesting in classic like RAAL engineering style. You've got these little recesses and then these little tongues, and the idea is you just kind of pop it in there and then you know, kind of just tweak it and pop it in there. You know, it's like, it's clever. I'm impressed from like a small batch manufacturing standpoint, how many like interesting things they've figured out. But you hear a little clack. There's this little clacking, which you don't hear when they're on because it all just presses down and it clamps and it's fine. But there's just those funny little things about this brand that like, I'd prefer to love than hate, but they could bug you a little bit. What else can I tell you? Amp matching is clearly a thing for these. They do need a pretty solid power reserve. I tried them both with headphone amps and with speaker amps. The headphone amps I were trying were they're very powerful, like 8-watt region. And, you know, that's about what you needed. I felt like I'd have the volume knob up into the top, you know, 75% of power on tap to hear these things really sound good and come alive. I did have an amp that had multiple taps, so I could try impedance matching, and I thought that they sounded a lot better on the 32 ohm tap out of this guy than the 16 ohm tap out of this guy with the exact same amp, so it felt like a pretty fair test. It just was more put together, more separation, more definition. You know, if I went for kind of cleaner, leaner solid state amps, I'd get a sound that was kind of brighter and more energetic. If I went with like warmer, rounder tube amps, like it really took what the amp was giving it and reflected that, which is interesting. Like sometimes when you're dealing with transformer box, whether it's like powering, well, I don't know. I've powered planars, I powered E-stats with various transformer boxes, and in almost every case I found that like an amp that was dedicated to drive that kind of headphone was always better. But it is sometimes in my experience, the transformer box ends up really muting what the amp is, and that's not the case here. I think you get the signature of the amp coming through that transformer box, and so I didn't get to hear these with like a RAAL amp or a Jotunheim R, so I don't know, but I get the sense there's probably more that these can do with a perfect, well-engineered amp designed to drive them, but I enjoyed playing with the transformer box. Yeah, so I don't know. That's kind of interesting. One interesting thing, I was testing a couple of DACs unrelated to these headphones while I had them and listening with a bunch of different headphones, and for some reason the DAC switch was much more noticeable on these than on the other headphones that I was auditioning the two DACs with, which was like a bit of a head scratcher for me, so don't read too much into that, but just a random little aside. So yeah, I mean, would I have them? What do they compete with? I don't know. It's kind of a tough debate. There's plenty of $2,000 to $3,000, $2,000 to $4,000, you know, high-end planar headphones available right now, and I guess some dynamics as well, right? But if you've tried E-stats and you sort of like the kind of energy and crispness and speed that you can get from those, you also like planars, and you're maybe trying to find something that's kind of a little bit in between, or you're really committed to a system designed for planar headphones, and so you don't want to go into E-stats and have to go get all kinds of separate amping and whatnot. This with the transformer box gives you kind of a really nice way to have that sound signature on hand and experience it. I mean, they're pretty unique though. They're definitely different from like say the LCD-R, which is in theory another ribbon offering. So they are a very unique listen, much like their predecessor, which is still in production, that the SR1a or SR1b, if it's called now, is still in production, and a totally different headphone and really interesting in its own right. So yeah, I'll leave it there. Kind of indecisive. You know, that's kind of how I felt though. I felt a little like undecided about these. There were points when I was listening to them and I thought like, wow, these are pretty impressive, and especially at the price range. And there's points where I was like, I'm just not connecting with this track as I would expect to, and I'm feeling a little like, you know, just a little like taken out by the technology or something. So there's a super indecisive and probably unhelpful review, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time. And until then, this is Science Craft, signing out.